Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for hopping on today. I'm Holly Tate from Leadr. I'm joined by Matt Tressiter and Chris Heaslip, our two courageous co-founders. And we are so excited to be able to talk to you today about moving from people management to people development, because if you signed up for this webinar, you know that we have a hot take, and that is that management is dead. So as you're joining us, we want to hear from you. Where are you joining us from today? I live in Houston, but I'm actually in Alabama. I can't even tell you the town. I don't know how to pronounce it, Matt and Chris. I'm not sure. I'm about an hour south of Birmingham. That's what I know.
Let's try and pronounce it and the Kiwi accent. So let's Chris and I give it a go. What's the name of the town in American?
I honestly can't say it. It's like I want to say Talladega Nights because Talladega is really close to where I am, but it's like Skilicia or something. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I can't help you. Sorry.
Let's say with an English accent, Birmingham.
Birmingham. Yeah, that's so good. Well, we'd love to hear where you are from. So you should be able to chat with us in your chat feature on your Zoom panel or in the Q&A box. Quick heads up, in the chat feature, you might have to toggle it to everyone rather than just panelists or hosts. But hop in there and let us know where you are joining us, or where you're joining from today. All right, Sarah is from North Georgia, not too far from where I am in Alabama. We've got Virginia Beach, North Carolina, Florida, lots of the Southeast representing today. Oh, there's Yoel from New Jersey, Texas, McKinney. Love it. Des Moines, Iowa. Never been to Des Moines. I want to go to Iowa. Never been. That's awesome. All right. Well, let's hop in as everybody's joining, and we want this to be very engaging. So as we are talking today, we'd love for you to post your questions in the chat panel or in the Q&A panel. We'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. But first, I would love just a quick introduction from Matt and Chris before we kind of hop into why we're so passionate about this topic of people management to people development. So first, Chris Heaslip, our executive chairman and co-founder. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you founded Leadr.
Absolutely. I trained as an accountant, which is a weird thing to do, to go from accounting to technology, and then had the good privilege to start a giving company called PushPay. I moved to Seattle in 2014 and grew the company from 0 to 400 plus people in a handful of years, which was a wild ride. And at the end of that, we moved down here to Dallas, Texas, to focus on Leadr. And the big takeaway for me was that, we had a amazing company that was growing really well. And I sat down and wrote down 5 things that I would do differently the next time around. And one of them was about how I would focus on developing people, because the thing I think that we're going to remember 30, 40, 50 years from now is not, did you hit the quarterly goal, although that's really important, or did you, like what was happening in the company at that moment. What we're going to remember is, how do we treat people and how do people feel who work for us? And so that was the genesis of Leadr, is really creating clear expectations so that the people who work for us can be developed. And hopefully many years from now, they'll say, hey, I really remember the fact that you took a chance on me, you believed in me, you invested in me, and I went on to do these amazing things.
That's awesome. I know I've been the recipient of that, Chris, and all of the amazing customers that we get to help that are able to see your vision for people development realized. So that's awesome. All right, Matt, our CEO and co-founder. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you founded Leadr.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, everyone, I'm Matt. I'm also a recipient of Chris's passion for people development. So like Chris mentioned, I joined the PushPay team when we probably had 5 or 6 people. And then over the next 5 years, I think if you Googled case studies for growing pains, it would just be my face. Every single growing pain that you can imagine under the sun, I went through, whether that's leading my first team, leading my first team of leaders, having to lead through process as opposed to leading directly with frontline staff. And so I made every mistake under the sun, and then we got a few things right in the process. And so when Chris called me, I took about 6 months off after that journey because I needed some sleep. But Chris called me on my break and said, "Hey, Matt, do you want to do it again?" I was like, depends, Chris. Like, what are we talking about here? And he's like, I want to solve for the problem of unhealthy leaders in the workplace. And I just said yes, because I think more often than not, it's not what gets you out of bed in the morning, it's what keeps you awake at night. And unhealthy leaders creating unhealthy staff, and healthy leaders creating healthy staff, that's the thing that keeps me up at night. And I know we can bridge that gap. So that's what gets me fired up. That's why I'm so excited to be down here in Freedom Town, aka Texas. And just love being here these last few years and building Leadr. It's been fun.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, as we set the foundation for our time together today, as we talk about the shift from people management to people development, you both have been on this journey for a little over 4 years now. I've gotten to be a part of this journey for about 2 years now, but specifically in the past, it's about 9 months or so, we've been exploring this hot take of management is dead. And so I want to set the foundation with a couple of stats for us to really understand why we're so passionate about this concept here at Leadr. So we're in a really interesting time in history where we have juxtaposing economic markets happening right now. So at the same time that we're having record high job creation, this is fascinating, that literally 11 million jobs were created between 2021 and 2022, which was a 40-year record. We're having record high layoffs specifically in the tech industry. It's the highest since the dot-com crash. So if you maybe work in a more nonprofit sector, this might not be affecting you yet, but that's the key word, is yet. There are a lot of businesses that are being affected by this. And so it's a really interesting juxtaposition when we look at this data and we go, what in the world is happening? And so as we put our heads together here at Leadr, we really realized it's happening because of these two things. So we have the Great Resignation. So November of last year, Matt and Chris, this is crazy. It was the 18th straight month of record voluntary job departures. The keyword there is voluntary. So in a time where we have record layoffs, people are raising their hand and voluntarily saying, I'm done and I'm looking for something else before they have something else lined up. And then for those that are left, what the data tells us is that we have this concept of quiet quitting, which was kind of a buzzword that became popular about 6 months ago or so. But when you look at the data, Gallup tells us that 80% of people are disengaged in their work. So this is they're checking in, they're checking out, they're checking a box and moving on. They're not really bought into the purpose of why they're doing what they're doing. And
That
so,
one,
Matt.
real quick, Holly, that one's so important, right? I've heard it said, don't worry about the people that are leaving your team, worry about the people that are still there and have already left in their heads. And sometimes that can be really hard to quantify. But when I think about that as a leader, that's the thing that I have to fix.
It's so true. And a lot of this too, Matt, and I know you can speak to this specifically, our team at Leadr, is a generational shift. So we've seen the shift from, we had, the silent generation and baby boomers who had more of a view of their work as, more hierarchical. So if we look here at the left side of the screen, this is the way that builders and boomers were really looking at their leadership structure and their boss. There was someone that was in charge at the top of the org chart. But as we've shifted to Gen X and millennials, which is what Gen Y is, that's just another word for millennials, we kind of became more collaborative. So I like to think of people like Jack Welch, who was, the CEO of GE. His whole leadership philosophy was you fire the bottom 10% every quarter, which was more of that builders and boomers mentality. And then as people like Brene Brown or Simon Sinek came along and really exposed this idea of more collaborative leadership styles, a flatter org chart, which is what Gen X and Generation Y or millennials have really followed. But what's really interesting here is when we look at Generation Z. So their view of their leader is wildly different than any generation before them, which means their expectation of the workplace is wildly different than any generation before them. And this is really critical when we think about how do we attract, retain, and develop the people on our team so that we can drive performance. It's the shift from management to coaching. And so really that is the bedrock of our hot take that management is dead, because we now live in an employee-driven market. So I'm going to pause there because I really want to hear from you, Matt and Chris. about what you've learned along the way that have really driven you to believing so passionately in this. So Chris, I want to start with you. Talk to me about your journey. You touched on it a few minutes ago and in your introduction, but what really led you to realizing that management is dead and it's more about coaching and people development?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think about a time we had Pushpay was growing. We were achieving some goals. Things were going pretty good, but of course, like any startup, we didn't quite have structure and processes and those kind of things built out yet. And so we ended up hiring a guy, not his real name, that we'll call Bob. And Bob came in, and the first 3 or 4 months, things went really well. He put system structure. He was in charge of the sales team, and he took a lot of the kind of ideas that we had and put a lot of systems and structure around it. And really, people responded well to that for the first 3 or 4 months. Bob was, the typical kind of khaki wearing, blue collar shirt, button down collar from the Midwest. And he would come in and he had this booming voice, and you would know every day when he walked into the sales floor because he would just kind of let everyone know that he was there. And, look, that's very, kind of representative of, folks in their 40s and 50s now who are just kind of like command and control style leaders, exactly what you were talking about, Holly. And then something interesting happened. About 4 months in, the results started kind of plateauing, and then they started declining. And I kept pushing Bob. I'd say, like, what's going on here, Bob? What's going on? And he would say, well, like, I'm teaching the sales team to learn my pitch, and they have to do it exactly how I do it, because that's how I've succeeded before in the different environments I've been in. Is, they have to do it exactly like I would do it, because if they do it exactly like I would do it, then they're going to get the same results that I would get if I was the one on the phone making the phone calls. And I thought, okay, like, most of the staff that we have are millennial aged, younger folks who love, pour overs and expensive coffee. And kind of, I was trying to figure out in my head how this kind of approach of just doubling down on learning the exact script. I mean, to the point that he would force people to have the exact intonations in their voice of inflections and things. I mean, the voicemails that people would leave on the sales team had to be exactly word for word how he had scripted it out. And when people wouldn't, do it exactly word for word, he would kind of tell them off and say, listen, like, I wrote this, I know this works, I've used it before. The problem is that you're saying a word out of order. That's what's, not leading to the results. And so another month went by and the sales went down even further. And I remember asking him, look, what is your plan to try and turn this around? Because things are really now, getting pretty desperate. We're, a few months into this, and it just doesn't seem like that. And he didn't have a lot of answers on how to kind of fix the problem, or even exactly what the problem was. So we ended up parting ways with Bob, and that's where Matt comes in. He got promoted to be the VP of sales, and we started meeting with the sales team to figure out what was going on and why, all of a sudden results had kind of plateaued and then dropped off a cliff. And what I heard from people was that we didn't like the fact that Bob didn't trust us. He was domineering, he was commanding control, and this kind of language that, maybe in the workplace 20 years ago was just, hey, this is how things were. I worked at a big accounting firm. I was a cog in a machine. I know exactly what that's like. And yet, the folks who were working in that team were saying, hey, I feel stifled. And what was even more alarming was that the best performers on the team were already out looking for other jobs, because their view was that they didn't get to use their strengths. They didn't get to bring their personality to work every day. They were just being told exactly what to do, and they decided that they didn't want to be part of that. And so the end of the story is obviously very positive. Matt came in, started building team and culture, and the 2 months after that were the best 2 months in the history of the company. From things were a disaster to the 2 record months. in the space of a few weeks to turn that around. You say, well, what exactly changed to lead to a massive change in results? The team didn't change, the product didn't change, the pricing didn't change, the promotion didn't change. Like literally nothing changed apart from one thing. And the one thing that changed was the leader.
Mm.
And I started thinking about how do you try and kind of synthesize this viewpoint of what Bob was doing into a kind of, how do you summarize that in one sentence? And the best way that I can describe that is in the old school way of doing things, you had a mission that the company existed for, that could be for profit, like we just exist to make money, or, we exist to help people. And then the mission drove the results. Okay, we need to just get people, in the seat doing exactly what we tell them to do. And if you achieve results, you get to stay on the team. And so in terms of the order of prioritization, it's the mission. And if you achieve results, you get to stay. And if you don't, you're gone. And that leads then to the team. And the team is just assessed based on results. There's no niceties. There's no investing in the team. Just like Bob, the problem is that you're not doing it exactly how I tell you to. Whereas in today's workforce, that is not going to work anymore. Exactly what we experienced. Great people don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be managed. Just think about, what do you manage? You manage profit and loss statements and numbers. The idea of managing people, it just kind of, even as we think about it, is a foreign concept. What do people want? People want to be led. They want to be invested in. They don't want to be managed to just do something. They don't want to be a cog in a wheel. And especially millennials who are looking for purpose and mission and passion that they can bring their whole selves to work. We've all heard that before. They want to feel like they're part of the team, that they have a say in how things are done. Mm-hmm. And so I want to present to you a new way of seeing this, which is instead of mission results team, it's we have a mission and we focus on building the team. The leader's job is to hire the right people, bring them on the bus, develop culture, and trust their people. And then if we do a good job of building the team, of creating culture, of leading well, of caring and investing in our people, but also, like we'll talk about, setting realistic expectations for performance, we will get results. And I think for me, the number one thing I wrote down from my 10 years of going 0 to 400 people of leading an organization is that my mindset was fundamentally wrong, because I thought like Bob did. And I think that's not going to cut it anymore. You will not be able to hold on to your staff. You won't be able to empower your staff. And even if people do stay, you will not be getting the best from them, because they won't be bringing their heart to work. They're going to be here for a paycheck and clock out at 5 o'clock. Whereas what we need to do is say, we have a mission, we build a team, and if we build a great team, the team will produce results. And that's the synthesis of this whole idea, that management is dead because we don't manage people. We lead people, we invest in people, we care for people. And if we do that, we will get results. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time. So
Chris. Yeah. And really to kind of visualize this, and Matt, I know you can speak to this, because it's actually the cover of the book that you guys have written to kind of bring this story all together, which is the carrot versus the stick model just doesn't work anymore. I think we've all, I know I've tried both, right? I've tried the carrot, I've tried the stick. And the reality is it just doesn't work to what Chris, what you were saying is just we have it out of order. So Matt, curious to hear your side of that story. And then I know you and Chris have created these 5 foundations that you learned along the way that have really helped you understand how to effectively lead and develop a team.
Yeah, for sure. I think ultimately it comes down to that, right? That this idea of top-down management, it just has a diminishing return. You can have this immediate outcome when you come in and you're more of a driver than a drawer. If you've heard that analogy, you're driving people instead of drawing them. I think there is an immediate ROI on that, but I believe that's short-term thinking. Long-term thinking has to be developing our folks for the long-term ROI and the long-term impact that that's going to have. And ultimately what Chris said, people want to be led and developed, not managed. And ultimately that leading and developing produces greater results anyway. So it's a little ironic. But yeah, to your point, Holly, It's the 5 foundations that we think is the secret sauce. Each of those 5 foundations articulates a different habit that we have to instill within our frontline leaders. And if we don't, we're going to continue to fall back into some of those old habits that honestly are becoming ineffective over time.
It's so true. Well, grab your notes, grab your iPad, if you're a Leadr customer, grab your Leadr, take some notes in there, because we're going to walk through in the next 40 minutes together the 5 foundations of people development. And so this is really our philosophy at Leadr, and what's helped our 1,000 customers really be able to lead and develop and ultimately drive performance with their team. So the first one is recognizing the unique strengths of our people, of our team. So Chris, you touched on this with getting the results and team out of order, that it's really about building the right team that ultimately drives results. So there's a ton of stats on this, Chris. I mean, we could go on and on. I think the one that is the most compelling to me is this first one, that people who use their strengths in their work every day are 3 times more likely to just report an excellent quality of life overall. And we want those people on our team who are healthy and thriving and excited to come to work every day when their personal and professional lives are all healthy and integrated. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Chris. Why is recognizing our team or the individuals on our team for their unique skills and strengths so important to these 5 foundations of people development?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most important things we can do for a couple of reasons. Number one, I remember hearing a Marcus Buckingham statistic a while back that the number one predictor of turnover for employees is the answer to this question: did I use my strengths in my job this week? And if the answer is no, the likelihood that that employee is going to leave is incredibly high. And so people want to bring their strengths to work, and they want to feel like they're having an impact and a difference. And ultimately, if they're not using their strengths, then they're not going to stay in that job for a really long period of time. And we've talked about this before. The number one reason people leave a job is because they're looking for career development as the next step. And I can tell you that from our experience, leading 500 people as well, that people leave for career development. And so before I get into kind of practically how to do that, one thing I think people ask all the time is they say, well, hold on a second, like, how do I develop my staff? I mean, I need to get results. It's, helping people use their strengths. It just seems so kind of ethereal, but I've got to get business results here. I've got to achieve outcomes. I can't just be sitting around developing people in a training session. And one of the things I thought that I would share is I met this guy who was one of the head HR people from DocuSign. And he told me this exercise that was really interesting. He said, Chris, you don't understand, like, developing people and doing the job is not 2 separate things. It's the same thing. And I said, Michael, what do you mean by that? He said, well, just take an idea. Let's say you take the 5 biggest problems that exist in your organization that don't currently have an executive owner, and you find 5 people who are looking for career development, and you match these together. And you say, okay, Jenny, you're going to take on, building a new marketing plan or whatever it is. Well, first of all, there's no bad outcomes in that situation, because either A, the marketing plan gets rebuilt and delivers some amazing results, or B, it doesn't, but Jenny has had a great opportunity to learn from doing that. And so I think this idea that people development and helping people develop their strengths is somehow like separate from the work we do is just an erroneous notion. We actually have to see it as the same thing. And we also have to start to talk to our staff and our managers like it's the same thing. Hey, listen, like, don't just think about, developing staff in a classroom setting. Think about it in the flow of the everyday work that they do. Find opportunities to coach and develop people, because look, that's what they're looking for. So I just think it's really important to start with that. But despite kind of knowing this, what's interesting is that we often hire people not based on their strengths, but for a lack of weakness. And we find ourselves doing this all the time when we look at resumes or we look at staff on our team. We don't focus on the strengths that they have. We say, oh, well, this person doesn't have any weaknesses, so therefore they're a good fit. And it really takes a lot of courage and leadership to say, this person I'm about to put into this role does have some weaknesses, but based on what we shared before, the mission, we develop our team and then the team builds the results, we have to think a little differently and say, yes, this person has weaknesses, but we can work with them on their strengths. And that's exactly what happened with Matt when Matt got put in to be the VP of sales. He had no VP level experience before, but I said, hey, there's some strengths here. There's some things that Matt brings to the table. He already is well respected by the team. He knows the product because he's been with the company for a long time. I trust that he's going to tell me if things aren't going so well. So Matt stepped into the role, and as we shared, he did a phenomenal job. So it was really about his strengths, not his lack of weaknesses, that helped him to do that. And I'm sure he'll share what he did when he in some of the one-to-ones here in a moment. And then how do we do this within Leadr? Well, we have developed a kind of baseball card front and center where you can see important information about people. And if you ask me if you're a brand new leader, in fact, Matt asked me this exact question when he stepped into the role. He's like, what's the biggest ROI thing that I can do right now that doesn't cost any money? And I said, start to care for your people. And that's getting to know people, getting to know what their hopes and dreams are. Where do they want to go? What is it that they want to achieve? And what are some things that we can know about them personally to make sure that we're aligning with what it is they want to achieve? Because with this demographic shift, this kind of generational change, saying, hey, you're here, you're a cog in our wheel and you're going to help us get results, that isn't going to work. But how can we align between what we want to achieve for our business outcomes and what do you want to achieve for your career? And how do we find something at this intersection where we can kind of partner together for a period of time that you can be developed and we can achieve outcomes? That's really where something special happens. And being able to leverage information and data to say, hey, Holly, I know this is who you are. This is your strengths and weaknesses. We have a project that needs someone with your exact abilities is very exciting, because that's how we as leaders succeed. And it's how Holly gets developed, by taking on that particular project.
That's so true, Chris. And many that are watching today are probably like, yeah, well, we take personality assessments, we talk about them. But if you're anything like me, I get really excited about them. And then I put them in a filing cabinet, or an electronic version of a filing cabinet called Google Drive. And which is funny because my care card says right here that I'm like Leslie Knope. Her love of binders is my love for Google Drive. And then I forget about them and I never look at those personality assessments again. And so what was so genius about what you and Matt have created, Chris, is to be able to have this front and center to make managers better leaders. So that this is front and center every single time that we're talking to someone, whether we have a meeting with them, a one-on-one meeting with them every week, or whether we're meeting with them for the first time, we really help them be seen and known and recognized for the unique skills and strengths that they bring to our team. So the other thing too, Chris, that we've been working on here at Leadr, that if you're a Leadr customer watching, I know we have several of you out there, you get a sneak peek into this, is this concept of how do we practically recognize our team for their unique skills and strengths. And so that's why we're so excited that we're going to have recognition that's rolling out later this month to our Leadr customers. And this idea being that how many times in Slack or Microsoft Teams or even just like a little thank you note where we recognize someone, but it gets lost in the noise. It's not memorialized. It's not front and center to remind that person for the great work that they're doing and how they are perfectly suited for their role. And so that's why we have built Leadr and specifically recognition inside the tool, so that that recognition can be memorialized, celebrated. And then what we all know is that what gets celebrated gets repeated. And so that's why recognition, specifically around unique skills and strengths, is so important. All right, Matt, I want to go to our foundation number 2. All right. So the first one was recognizing unique skills and strengths. The second one is making sure that every team member has a personalized growth plan. So there's a pretty compelling data out here about growth plans. And Chris, you said this earlier, that the majority of people who leave their jobs, the number one reason is because of a lack of career plan. And so the data tells us that 93% of employees would stay at an organization longer if it invested in their careers. That's what the LinkedIn workforce report told us about that. So Matt, I know you've had a personal story specifically about this point that I would love to hear from you on around this concept of personalized growth plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I jump into the story about Brittany, which is a fun story I think you're all going to appreciate, let me share a saying that we have at Leadr. So the saying goes something like this: in every room there's an elephant, and so instead of letting the elephant just sit there, we shoot the elephant. And so I know that's a little aggressive, and one day we're going to get sued by PETA for it, I'm sure. Trust me, we like elephants. But this, I think the sentiment's true, right? In every room there's an elephant, and instead of just letting the elephant sit there, we should shoot the elephant. So if there are leaders on the call that are anything like me, when you start talking about this conversation of development, I think there's this elephant in the room that none of us address. And the elephant in the room is, why, Matt, in the world should I invest in my people if they're going to be developed and then they're just going to leave? Right? Why should I invest? Why should I develop my people if they're just going to leave? And I think the counter argument to that is, what if you don't invest into your people and they stay? What if you don't invest? What if you don't develop your people and they stay? So I think Brittany is the perfect story that sums this up. So Brittany had been at Leadr for about 3 years. She came on board as our marketing intern, I think, right, Holly? She came on board as a marketing intern, and then she said, and she was doing all sorts of things. I think she helped us build our first website right at the beginning, helping us build Leadr from the ground up. She actually moved to Texas with us when we relocated from Seattle, raised her hand and said, hey, I want to be in sales, sat in the sales seat for 18 months, did a phenomenal job. And then she found another opportunity and came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking about taking this other job, but I'm feeling guilty. Should I stay or should I go? And I was like, Brittany, you have to go. And everyone was really confused by that. Everyone was like really sad and upset. I'm like, of course I'm sad that Brittany's leaving, but ultimately we have to celebrate the reality that we're going to have people for a short time. And for that time, we're going to invest and develop them into the role that might be here or might be elsewhere. A few cool things have happened out of this story. I've had 2 candidates that have since come to work here that called Brittany as a reference, and she said, double thumbs up, you have to go and work for those guys. Never would have happened if we'd ended on bad terms. 2 of her family members are now customers of Leadr, and that is because of the strong reference and the experience that she had here, because we didn't end on bad terms. And the third thing is, we continue to celebrate Brittany's story as, I can't promise you that you're going to win or lose, but I can promise you that by being at Leadr, you're going to develop and grow. And so at the end of the day, I think we have to see that as a win. Gone are the days where people go work at Boeing for 30 years and that's their career from start to finish. That's my grandfather-in-law. That was his journey and his story. I think that's the very rare case these days. We have people for a very short period of time, and we should see development inside and outside of the organization as a massive win. So that's Brittany, and that's shooting elephants. I hope shooting elephants doesn't get snippeted, and that's the only thing that's remembered from the day.
Yeah, we don't want that to be a sound clip. And that was brilliant, bringing those 2 things together, Brittany and elephants. That's awesome. But Matt, tell us, like, practically, what does this look like? Because one of the biggest pushbacks that I hear to this foundation is that personalized growth plan, it feels like a lot of work. And it's, Matt or Holly, I don't have time to build out growth plans. You're telling me every single person, like, I give them a paycheck, that's their job. Why can't they just come in and do that every day? So what are some practical steps of what this should look like to have every person have a growth plan on our team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key point is tying organizational objectives, things that they're working on, to their personal goals. So you have to start from a common ground of, what are the things that matter most to you? Where do you want to grow? Where do you want to develop? And then the cheat sheet that I use is just weekly reminders. Every single one-on-one that I'm having, I just have recurring agenda items prompting me, hey, how are we tracking on this thing? How are we doing on this thing? Last week, we said we we're going to read this book. Last week, we said we're going to watch this podcast. Last week, we said we're going to go online and look at this webinar. Little plug for the webinar here today. But, we have to, I think what's easy for us to forget to do as leaders is check back in. And so I think the most important thing is establishing the common ground, making sure that it's personal to their objectives that match the organizational objectives. And then number 3, bringing them up frequently. Because the moment that it becomes this like flash in the pan, annual review, we'll talk about it once a year and then we never reference it again, that speaks more volumes than anything else, right? It's the actions speak louder than words. So I think the most important thing we can do as leaders is, number 1, establish the common ground. Number 2, personalize it to make sure that it's their personal goals meeting the company objectives. And then number 3, don't forget, bring it up frequently. Don't forget to talk about it at least on a monthly basis, probably more like bi-weekly.
So good. And we actually, you and I, Matt, did a whole webinar on this specific topic and this foundation of ours, which we'll send out to everybody in the follow-up email. So stay tuned for that. I like to talk about this foundation as just making sure that every person has a best next step. So to your point, Matt, in the one-on-one, just having those recurring agenda items. And February 1st of this year was my favorite day of the year so far, because I got to promote Kristen, who was our senior marketing manager at the time, into the director of marketing role. And so exactly what you just described, Matt, in our one-on-one, every single week, we held space for her growth track right here. And she had a Google Doc, she had a goal built out all about her pathway to director of marketing and what she was doing to earn her stripes. That's one of our values here at Leadr. And being able to use the Leadr tool to help both of us be accountable for making sure that we were developing her in that way. So just a really practical example of how you can leverage Leadr to help you make sure that you're setting up every single person on your team for a growth plan.
Bingo.
All right, we're moving really well. Now we've got foundation number 3, which is setting clear goals. This is one of the most challenging that I see across the board with organizations that I work with, that executive teams spend a lot of time in strategic planning, and they walk out with a strategic plan that they feel great about, but they don't cascade that plan or those goals down the org chart. And so the team feels lost and confused, and they're wondering why they invested all this time and energy and money on a strategic plan that never got done. And I really believe it's because of a lack of setting clear goals. So we've got a stat here. This is pretty compelling, that only 4 in 10 employees know their company's vision. Let's just let that sink in for a second. 4 in 10 employees, only that many know their company's vision, and 57% are unmotivated by guiding the mission. That's that quiet quitting. They're unmotivated. They're not interested in guiding the mission and seeing it to reality. So Chris, I know that you have a lot of experience in this. You've built several successful companies now. And so what would you say, why are goals so critical to development? Uh-oh, Chris, we can't hear you. I'm
you hear
sure
me now?
it's so good. Yes, you're back. We can hear you
All
now.
right. I think it was Einstein that said visions without goals are hallucinations. So, we've got to take the grand dreams that we have and translate them into short-term deliverables that we can kind of focus on. And we had someone who just joined the team the other day, and I was checking in with him after a couple of weeks, and I said, "What's your kind of big takeaway?" And he said, "Man, you guys talk a lot about goals. Like every single week when you do all hands, the numbers are right there in front of everybody." And I was like, "Didn't you do this? You worked for the gold standard, like an 800-person organization before." And I was like, "Didn't they do this?" And he's like, "No, we did all hands infrequently. And the goals, were not front and center. People wouldn't talk." It blew my mind, because this to me seems like business 101, but that's because no one ever told me this is how you do it. I just tried to figure it out as we went. And so a couple of stories about this. One was we were in a pretty bad state one quarter. We were running way behind in terms of our sales number. And I just given the talk to the company, and of course one of the pushbacks is, well, like, don't people get demoralized when you tell them, like, hey, this is the number, this is where we're at? And we had an SDR team leader who SDRs do cold calling to prospects, and her name was Amanda. And I could see she was kind of waiting to talk to me after the all hands. And so she came up and she said, "Well, what can I do? Because I see that this is the case, but I want to be able to do something towards that." And I said to her, "Well, this is exactly what it looks like. We're behind by 20% or 30%. We would need to achieve this extra 30% in order to be on track with our goals." And she said, "Great. Well, I'm going to have my team come in." They usually start at about 7:30. So I'm going to have my team come in an hour earlier to make some additional calls to try and help make up the difference. And I was like, what? Like, without me asking her to do that, she was asking her team to come and do it, and they had all agreed. And simply by sharing and being transparent that this is where the company was at, this is what it means to us if we missed, it would, at that time we were in the middle of a fundraising process, it could have been like really catastrophic. And to have someone who proactively came and said, look, I want to help with that, was just mind blowing to me. So I turn up on Monday morning at 6:30 because I was like, I just wonder if Amanda is going to be here, or is this just all talk? And of course she's there, and she had brought an espresso machine in, and she was making coffees for a whole team. And I was like, man. So I went down the road and got a whole bunch of Nespresso pods to help kind of encourage them. But it's that kind of thing. When you share the goals, when you're transparent with where you're at, and you have a clear, well, if we miss, this is what it means. I think the right leaders are going to be motivated to step up and try and help to achieve those goals.
And moral of the story, more caffeine, more performance.
More caffeine.
And Nespresso helps.
The world is run on caffeine.
Yeah. But Chris, what you're saying there is so important because you brought them back to the mission. So it wasn't just about the sales target, but you reminded them of the sales target is important because of our guiding mission, which is what this stat right here is saying, is that so many employees are just unmotivated by it. And so us as the leader, bringing them back to that, to have buy-in and show them how their goals are directly contributing to that mission, which is why they signed up for their job in the first place.
Exactly. And sharing the top-down approach is really important, because when people can see how what they do connects with the broader goal, the broader organization's mission, people are really willing to go that extra mile. And what's amazing about Amanda is she was now running like talent for one of the top 10 tech companies in Europe. And I was like, yeah, it's no wonder, because, she was a rock star who stepped up to help out at that really difficult moment.
That's awesome. So Chris, practically speaking, what can we tell people on the call? You're like, I know it's so important. Yes, clear goals. What are some practical steps that if an organization is just getting started, or maybe their goals aren't working right now, that they can take to help move their goals in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first one is having clear goals for the organization and taking that from an annual to a quarter to a month to a week. One of my mentors told me, he had weekly goals. He said one of the big problems with big organizations, they have quarterly goals. Well, by the time you get 2/3 of the way through the quarter, it's too late to be able to pivot and adjust. So really setting much more kind of short-term goals. And then for our staff, being able to tie together this concept of achieving goals comes from personal growth, and showing them how investing in themselves, and, for staff who are trying to like figure out, okay, like I'm working hard. For Amanda, who was working hard, this goal here, it was a great example of how her leadership, she inspired her team. She asked for more from them. She coached in them, invested them. And then when she needed to, when things were in a pickle, she was able to say, I need your help to help us, the whole team, be able to get there. And so when you do that, you provide clarity and motivation to the whole team, because you're like, okay, this is what we need to do. Everyone understands, and they can see the tie between achieving the goal and their own personal growth. And in future, they can point back and say, I was part of this team that achieved this incredible milestone, and I grew more in that challenging season. Like, we think people just want it easy. Hey, let's just give it to them on a silver platter. But that's not how you grow. You don't grow big muscles by sitting at home. You've got to go to the gym, be uncomfortable, do a bit of work. It's the same thing here for our staff, that their growth and development is tied to just a little bit of healthy tension, where they can actually do some of the work and level up in that process.
Yeah, so good, Chris. And make sure if you've got questions along the way, drop them in the chat or the Q&A. Just wanted to remind people of that as we move on to 4 and 5. But Chris, what's so important about that is that we've got to make sure that we have visibility, because people want to know that they're winning. No one likes going to work every day wondering if they're winning or they're losing. And so inside, just getting really practical here, inside of Leadr, the beauty of it is that you can track all of your goals in one place. You can assign action items, make sure everybody is clear about what winning looks like across the team. And so if you're not using your goals module there inside of Leadr, just go ahead and get started. Put the objective, put a couple action items so that your team is all on the same page. And if you're struggling with goals right now and you're not a Leadr customer, we would love to show you how this can help you make sure there's clarity and winning across your culture there at your organization. All right, moving on to foundation number 4. We've got 2 more. So the next one is I would say probably our favorite, if not one of our favorites, which is the one-on-one meeting, that every employee should have a one-on-one meeting on a consistent basis. So we love data here at Leadr. And what the data tells us about the one-on-one meeting, this is from Metrics Global, that one-on-one meetings involving coaching produced a 529%.
That's a lot.
Pretty incredible. Yeah, that's a lot, AKA a lot. ROI, which is $5 for every $1 spent on coaching. Chris, I know you love that with your accounting background. I mean, I would love to get that back on every dollar I spend, as well as significant and tangible benefits to the business. So Matt, let's talk about, why are you so passionate about one-on-ones and how have you seen them play out in your leadership journey so far?
Yeah, I think we can talk about the stats all day, right, Holly? But I think facts tell and stories sell. So let me tell you from very, very personal experience about why I truly believe, and I'm not being dramatic when I say this, I think the one-on-one is the most powerful tool we have in the tool belt as a leader. So I worked for this one particular leader, we'll call them Alex, for about 2.5 years. And Alex and we clicked well on the performance side. But when it came anything towards care and development or investment and development, we just were like butting heads. We just did not see eye to eye. And if I was to sum up my 2.5 years of reporting to Alex, it would be didn't feel cared for, didn't feel invested in, didn't feel developed. If I was to summarize, it would be something along those lines. And I think it culminates in this one specific day I remember where Alex invited me out to lunch. And I kid you not, I thought I was getting fired. In 2.5 years, never been invited out to lunch. And Alex takes me down the road. I think it was a Whole Foods or Whole Paycheck. We sit down at Whole Paycheck and Alex says to me, hey, Matt, how you doing? And I legitimately didn't know what to say. He's like, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And I'm like, good. Yeah. How are you? And Alex is like, just wanted to see how's things are going. And I'm fully waiting for the shoe to drop. And by the way, today's your last day. I just knew it. You're getting me out of the office. There's this whole thing planned. Nothing happened. And I went back and I actually chatted with Chris about it. I'm like, he's like, hey, Matt, how you doing? You look like you've seen a ghost. And I'm like, the weirdest thing just happened. He's like, what happened? I'm like, well, Alex took me out for lunch. He's like, oh, okay. How did that go? And I'm like, I don't know. It was fine, I guess. He's like, well, I told Alex that he had to invest in you relationally more. I'm like, oh, okay, got it. That's what's happening right now. So the sad part of the story is if you are doing one-on-ones to check a box, you've missed the point completely. If you're doing one-on-ones to show up and say, if I do this, my employees are going to feel cared for, they're going to feel invested, and they're going to feel developed. I'm telling you right now, that will not have the desired effect. You have to go in with the genuine intention of developing your people and focusing on what we call the 3 keys or the 3 fundamentals of a good one-on-one, which is care, development, performance. Every one-on-one shouldn't have necessarily all 3 topics, but all 3 topics should be discussed at least on a bi-weekly or bi-monthly basis, at least. And so we talk about care, development, and performance. Every conversation should have a mixture of some of these different pieces of the different buckets, different frameworks. Because if you miss them, you'll be like me. You think you walk into a conversation and for the first time in 6 months, you get asked how you're doing and you think you're getting fired. It sounds dramatic for me to say that, but I know that there are people that are sitting in our teams thinking that, feeling that exact same way about one-on-ones with their manager. So don't be like Alex.
It's so true. And Matt, in my experience, it's usually your high performers who are the ones who are thinking that the most because they're the most self-critical.
Can I say something to illustrate that, Holly?
Yes.
This happens all the time. We have some tough feedback that we need to share with the team, and it's really for like 1 or 2 people in the team. And so we get our script ready, we write out all the words of exactly what we're going to say. And what happens? We get into the team meeting, and you intended it for these 1 or 2 people, and they don't hear it. They're sitting in the meeting going, oh, I wonder who he's talking about. And then the top performers who you don't want them to hear it are sitting there going, oh, he's talking about me. This is terrible. I don't want to be that person. The one-on-one is that opportunity to provide that clarity. And if we're not taking the time, to your point, to sit down and have those conversations, we completely miss the point.
So true, Matt. Well, let's get really practical and see what this looks like inside of Leadr. So this is actually a real one-on-one from me and Carissa on our team. And I want you to see, just really practically speaking, how you can do this. And so first of all, here's that care card we talked about, or the baseball card, that really reminds us as the leader of who Carissa really is, and how I, as her leader, can customize our one-on-one to really coach her to meet her personal goals, which align with our organizational goals. And then you'll notice here, I have a care question, because I'm a pretty operational leader. And if I'm not careful, I can jump into meetings and just want to talk about all the things that we need to get done. And so not only does this show her that I really care for her, but she also knows that it's me being intentional, because I'm holding space for us to really talk about how she's really doing every single week. And sometimes it's 2 minutes and sometimes it's 20 minutes. It just really depends on where she is, that week. Then we talk about her development. So it's care, then development. And at the time, Carissa was going through a leadership cohort. And so every week we had a recurring agenda item to really hold space for her development in that cohort and how she was applying it to her role here at Leadr. And then ultimately performance, which are her goals front and center up here, to make sure that we have clarity and we're all on track for what winning looks like. So care, development, performance, making sure that we get those one-on-ones on the calendar on a consistent basis, so that we are making sure that our team knows that we care about them as a person, their development, and ultimately driving performance for our organization. All right, foundation number 5. And then we've got a couple questions coming in. We're going to have about 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. So make sure that you drop those in the chat or in the Q&A module there in your Zoom. All right, giving effective feedback. Matt, you just used this F word. I actually do hear teams refer to the word feedback as that on their team, because it has become such an uncomfortable process and often a toxic environment for feedback. It has such a negative connotation, but I know we're passionate about changing that, transforming that here at Leadr and making it really healthy. So we're going to start with some data here. This is crazy to me. Generation Z, we talked about that, the management to coaching. They want weekly, if not daily, check-ins from their manager. And I'm just going to take a second to, if you're like, this is blowing my mind, 60%, they want me to check in with them every single day. Think about how they were raised. This is the first generation that can order food that's delivered to their doorstep within 30 minutes. This is the first generation that's been able to direct message influencers or celebrities across the world. They have instant access to anything that they want. They can post a picture on Instagram and get immediate feedback. So why would they not expect that from you as their leader or their workplace? So Matt, I'm curious to hear from you. How have you seen this concept of effective feedback, for better or for worse, play out in the workplace? And why is it one of our 5 foundations here at Leadr?
I totally appreciate the sentiment of feedback can be the F word. I get it. Anytime someone comes up to you and says, hey, Holly, do you mind if I share some feedback with you? No one in their right mind thinks, oh, he's about to tell me something really good, right? We just don't think that way. The moment that someone says, hey, can I share some feedback with you? What happens? Your heart sinks. You have that awful feeling in your stomach. You're just waiting for the shoe to drop of what are they going to say? And I think the reason for that is we don't bake it into a weekly habit or a weekly behavior that's happening on a consistent basis. What I like to say is feedback's weird. Let's make it as least weird as possible. And so a good example that sort of exemplifies this is actually a story with my wife, who works at another tech company. Before that, she had a one-on-one. She had frequent one-on-ones, but was never receiving feedback. And so it's just, you're doing great. Things are going well. Another colleague of hers had a similar experience, and then they got to their annual performance review. Dum, dum, dum. We all know what's going to happen. You get into the performance review, and what is it? It's shock, horror, surprise. Here's the 11 months of feedback that I've been storing up on my laundry list. And now that we're talking about your annual review, I'm going to just dump it all on you all at once. It is the worst experience for an employee to walk into a review and be surprised that way. So feedback sometimes is not about what is being shared. It's actually about when it's being shared or how often we're sharing it. And so my encouragement around being practical about giving effective feedback is just stepping up the cadence, stepping up the frequency of how often we're delivering it. Otherwise, you're going to be in the shoes like my wife was and her colleague, where you're just getting surprised in the annual review, and that just completely disenfranchises people. they're not looking forward for the next 12-month review. They're probably on a 12-month ticking time bomb of how do I get out before the next one? And so be timely, be consistent, be frequent. That's the most practical that I can encourage you all to just provide it. And not making it as weird as it needs to be. Feedback is just uncomfortable. No one likes that question, but I think you can make it less weird.
It's so true. And just really practical inside of Leadr, there is actually a template called T3B3, top three, bottom three. And Matt, I really learned this from you. On a quarterly basis, we send our leaders, managers at Leadr sends this out to our team, usually one person above you on the org chart, one person with you, and one person below you on the org chart, that asks two simple questions. From your perspective, what are my top three skills? And from your perspective, what are my bottom three skills? And you're seeing Kristen on my team. These are her real responses to those questions that I asked her. What's critical here is when you get that feedback, make sure that you thank your team for that feedback.
Yes.
Close the feedback loop. There's nothing more nerve-wracking than sending feedback to your boss and then wondering if they're mad at you.
Like out into the void, you never hear back.
Yes, that's horrible. So lead with gratitude, thank your team for that feedback, and find one area where you're going to really try to work on over that next quarter so that they can see that you're really listening. All right, we're going to jump into some Q&A. I see John has a really good question, but before we do that, I just want to make sure that everybody is really clear on some next steps. So first, if you're not a Leadr user, we would love for you to sign up today. It's really easy to get started. You can email me, who was sending you emails about this, at holly.tate@leadr.com, or go to our website, leadr.com, and our team was waiting to talk to you. The second one is if you are a Leadr customer, we have two exciting opportunities for you: recognition that you heard about, and then insights as well. If you don't have it, we'd love to turn that on for you so you can have the power of your employee engagement data at your fingertips. And then we are so excited to show you the book cover for Management is Dead, which Matt and Chris have been working so hard on this for the last year or so. It's just really incredible that this was a dream that's now become a reality, and we will have books in our hands in the next few weeks. It's called Management is Dead, the 5 keys to unlock employee retention, skyrocket ROI, and lead a revolution. And so you can go to managementisdead.com to sign up for exclusive pre-sale information. It's coming out so soon. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can dive into some Q&A. I loved this question from John here. He says, Matt, I'm going to start with you. How do you help people that perform adequately but aren't interested in developing? What do you do?
It's a good question. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, can you achieve the organizational goals that you need to accomplish without people that are going over and above on a consistent basis? Because sometimes the reality is we don't need to have what Chris was describing, you sort of the 6 a.m. coffee hours to get where we need to go. And so if you're not needing to place undue pressure on the team and undue stress and force this opportunity for them to grow and develop because you're in a healthy place, then I think it's okay to lift your foot off the gas in some seasons. Now, the flip side of that is I think there are ways to lay out breadcrumbs of things that matter to them. And so I think the best thing that we can do is tie it back to their goals. I think something that Chris shared right at the top of the call is so important. Chris felt like a cog in the machine. I can tell you from experience, and I can tell you that the data speaks to this as well, no one wants to be a cog in a machine. So even if they don't say that they wanted to be developed, or they don't want to grow, or they don't want to be challenged, I know that they also don't want to be a cog. And so there's a middle ground, and we just have to find what that is. What is the one thing that you want to grow in? What's the one skill that you want to learn? What's the one soft skill that I can help you develop in that helps you get one step closer to that goal? It doesn't have to be this huge, I want to be the next Brene Brown public speaking extraordinaire. It doesn't have to be that. I think it can just be something small. Chris, what were you going to say?
No, I think that's exactly right. And tying it back to like their personal goals, I had a chance to sit with one of the preeminent motivational speakers, for the last 20 or 30 years. And the way he did it was he kind of fast forwarded to the pay review process and kind of said, look, in November, we're going to be sitting down and reviewing your compensation. So how would you like at that point, to have a little bit of a raise so that you could buy a nicer car, a nicer house, a trip to Europe, the honeymoon that you're saving up, whatever it is, and tying it back to that, because compensation and outputs is simply the result of people development. And I think exactly what Matt said, rather than making it into this, like, I need to sell you on how to develop, we really want to focus on just, hey, let's try and find a 5 or 10% improvement here. And that result is a 5 or 10% pay increase, right? Like if the person is doing better, and kind of showing them how a little bit more effort here results in a better outcome over here.
That's awesome. Well, we are at time. Carson did ask a question that I just want to address quickly. He said, you spoke to development plans of people, but what if you're in an organization that you want to keep them around, but you don't have an upward mobility pathway for them? And Anna dropped a really great webinar that you can check out for that question. But Carson, my encouragement is to just think about promotion of responsibility. It doesn't necessarily have to be a job title, doesn't necessarily have to be compensation, but how can you give that person more and more responsibility so that they can grow and develop? And there's really not a lose there for your organization. You're only going to increase in growth and performance as you're giving more of your team more responsibility. Well, Chris and Matt, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to walk us through these 5 foundations and really help us understand this concept of why you believe management is dead and how we're seeing the transformation of people management into people development and our 1,000 customers here at Leadr. We're so grateful for you. And thank you for you who joined our webinar today, joined us live, and for all of those watching on demand. We're cheering you on, and we are here to help you lead well in your organization. Have a great day, everybody.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.